Welcome to the Powerlifting and Power Ballads podcast, where we bring you a weekly dose of powerlifting news, tips, and training advice with a touch of 80s rock ballads. This podcast is presented by Team Roar Powerlifting, your source of the most comprehensive coaching and meet day preparation. Here are your hosts, Josh Rohr and Laura Sturm.
Today we have the 2021 Volunteer of the Year with us, Jordan Kummer. Welcome, Jordan.
Thank you all for having me.
Absolutely. So I have a lot of questions for you, sir. Let me start with this before I get to the questions. What is the reason that you are compelled to volunteer so much?
I was joking about this a few months back. I am a garbage spectator. So I like to attend these meets, but I also like being able to participate in them. So it's a way to give back to the sport because, frankly, I owe the sport a significant amount over the last 6 years. But it's also a way to partake in meets without actually competing in them. So it's fun for me. It's fun to get into that position. It's fun to practice spotting and loading and other parts of the sport. And I've been doing it for 2 years. It's been a blast.
I like that answer.
Yeah, that's a good one. So that's why I wanted you to come on here, because I think if we were to put your picture up somewhere at pretty much any Georgia powerlifting meet, people might not know who you are, but they would know who you are, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So I want to get a little bit more, I guess, spotlight put on you. And I know that's not necessarily your cup of tea.
It's well known, yeah.
But you're here now, so it's too late. So you said that you owe powerlifting a lot. What do you mean? Why do you owe powerlifting a lot?
I had spinal fusion in 2004. It's from roughly the T2 to the L1. It's about 13 roughly vertebrae. And for the longest time, I actually did not do much physically. I've lifted weights before, but not nearly with the discipline that I actually do now, with the constant regularity of powerlifting. And it started as an experiment. And I realized some of my colleagues at Elite Iron have pointed out it's time to stop calling it a twisted experiment, but it started as an experiment to see how much weight the fusion could handle. And from there, I've expanded into equipped lifting. I started raw, I went into equipped, and almost everything I've done in the last 6 years eventually traces back to powerlifting.
So the body's not as weak as some doctors and quote unquote experts would lead you to believe.
No, it's not. It's kind of a ride to look back over 6 years and go, oh, this is what you're capable of.
And I knew that because, I mean, you and I trained together a little bit here and there over at Elite Iron. So I kind of knew a little bit of your story, but I didn't know it was 13 vertebrae. That's pretty crazy.
I think it was back at GATA. I had wrapped your knees twice, both times garbage, but I had wrapped your knees twice. And haven't wrapped other people's knees in quite some time.
I mean, just grab somebody random in the gym and say like, "Hey, I'm wrapping you real quick. I need the practice." Don't give them an option to question it. Just do it. That's the answer.
Oh.
Next thing you know, they're lifting equipped. Maybe it doesn't work that way. that might be not accurate.
There's a few people that I'm needling to go equipped. I don't know if they ever will, but it's a more fun, more technical side of the sport.
Mm-hmm. Agree with you there too.
Yep. So we had some listeners submit questions. I'm going to go through those first, just because I want to make sure we get to them. Some of them are, you don't know yet because they just came in the last little bit. But first question: who's your favorite lifter and coach in the game? I don't know who submitted that. They submitted it anonymously.
For coach, I mean, I owe the man everything. His name is James Townsend. Been with him 6 years. I've worked around the fusion with him for the last 6 years. I've called platform backstage with him. Yeah, I owe the man everything. As for favorite lifter, I was joking with a few of them that I'm not going to pick a favorite sibling. I'm going to go outside of Elite Iron to two individuals. Michael, I believe it's Haffenbrack out of Texas, and Max McFarland out of Georgia, out of South Georgia.
We love Mike Haffenbrack.
Dude's great. Great dude to talk to, amazing lifter. I don't have the ability to handle his birthday deadlifts, but amazing lifter.
I can't do that either. So this one came in. I might have messed it up because I might have already asked you this right off the bat before I realized that this was his question. But Justin Little actually submitted, he goes, what drives your passion for powerlifting and specifically being a hell of a platform manager?
Yeah, I just enjoy doing it, frankly. I enjoy it as much, if not more, than competing. And it's also, there's a thrill to watching new spotter loaders get into that rhythm and start hitting their marks, and you're operating like an F1 pit crew. It happened even in the absolute heat box that was the Atlanta Open, to watch a team come into its own to the point where you can possibly step aside and just let them roll. There's something to that that's very difficult to describe to someone who hasn't been in that position.
I think that's interesting. I mean, and I guess I haven't really thought of it in too much detail, but you're right. Like somebody that's wanting to potentially get involved and volunteer, like you instantly do become a part of a team, either the scoring table team, the referee team, spotting and loading team. Like that's you got to all work together there. So I think that's one of my favorite things with spotting and loading is like everybody's working together, and it also sometimes becomes a little bit of a competition from one side to the other, like who can load it the fastest without having a misload. Like obviously that's, the most important part there, right?
It's also like how the teams interact between spotting and loading and the referees, for example, trying to do our job as a spotter without necessarily getting in the ref's way, or at least not intentionally obstructing their view from, say, the hip during squat.
So anybody that wants to, first of all, let's start with this. We need more people to get involved, right? Like Jordan is at pretty much every single meet, and Jordan should be able to sit down in the audience and watch a competition if he wants to. And I'm sure he could. I'm sure somebody would step up, but you're kind of the guy. So yeah. I guess what advice would you give people that are not sure that they want to volunteer, but maybe what encouragement / advice, how to get involved and do that?
We have to fall back on powerlifting's unique because even in the back, there's a very supportive environment. At nationals meets, I've had people from other teams work with us and I've worked with them. So those of us who have actually done it more will support the people who are coming in, and we want them to ask questions. We want them to get a feel for how things work. And it's sort of it's more incumbent on us than it is on the people coming in to sort of, for lack of a better term, give them a bit of grace. We had at every meet that I've been at, the first few attempts for squat are a little rough. And you can see some of the spotter loaders that are relatively new sort of become nervous over the first 4, 5, 6 attempts because are we doing it right? Are we loading the first plate correctly? So we have to allow and provide an environment where they can make those mistakes, not for the entire meet, but at least for the first few attempts. It's more for us to welcome people in and support them and teach them. And hopefully they start to enjoy it as much as we do.
Yeah, I think there's a misnomer that like volunteers might think that they need to know a whole lot before they start. And you really don't. Like the people that are there already as volunteers kind of can guide.
I've occasionally joked that powerlifters who are in a gym like Elite Iron, like Quest, like Roswell Barbell, we're kind of spoiled in that way because we've grown up in that environment where we spot each other. That's not necessarily the norm. The norm for most people is LA Fitness, Gold's Gym, places where you don't necessarily have a small team where you can spot and load. So we need to understand that to the degree that we can, brief them. I believe in South Carolina, they're trying to work on seminars for spotting and loading and ways to do it off platform. I'm trying to figure that out because personally, I think one of the things that makes them somewhat nervous is, well, we have the rules briefing and then people who have never spotted and loaded in their life are learning how to spot and load in the space of 5-10 minutes. And we kick them out in front of an audience and expect them to perform. For some people, that's a lot of pressure all at once in front of an audience and possibly in front of a live stream audience. Need to find some way to remove that pressure and give them a controlled environment to learn that art.
Mm-hmm. Man, you got the wheels turning now. Like that is something I'm going to think more on because I think there is a way to do that. Even if it's just showing examples of meets and pointing out certain things, not to criticize people, but just to, show different scenarios that can come up just so that when it does, it's not deer in the headlights moment,
I actually need to get in touch. I believe Saber Schnitzer, a badass out of Virginia, I believe has a few videos on that, and I need to get in touch with him about that. He's had videos on spotting and loading for Virginia. I'm going to have to talk to him and see if still has them. I think he does.
Yeah, those
But,
would be interesting to see.
yeah.
So another question that came in, who do you think is the new upcoming Georgia powerlifting team?
South Georgia. I think I was joking with Max McFarland in South Georgia after his session at the Barbell Brawl. I look at him and say, can you go one meet without setting records? He is a phenomenal lifter, and it's just a good crew down there. I'm excited to see where they go in the sport.
All right. The softball questions are done. You ready?
Yeah.
All right. How did you end up in Georgia? You are not from Georgia, correct?
I'm not. Before Georgia, I was Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and no, I am not a Steeler fan. That comes up every often. Powerlifting is the only sport that I've actually followed. Originally, back when I was young and naive, I thought of going into journalism. So I had come down for SCAD, Savannah College Art and Design, Atlanta, to do video. I still have a little bit of that in my background, but not too much. I end up down in SCAD, end up trying to get back into lifting. Met a gentleman by the name of Luke Crawford, who got me back into lifting. Was briefly with a gentleman by the name of Robert Autry, and then ultimately in GATA with James Townsend. That's the short version of how I got down here.
The same Robert Autry that trains out of Quest? Okay.
Yes.
I never knew that. That's interesting.
Yeah. I was briefly with him, moved more toward a powerlifting style, and Crawford had talked about going to a gentleman by the name of Ryan Golden at GATA. And when I got there, I had told someone, I forget whom offhand, it's killing me that I don't remember their name, that I wanted to go more of a powerlifting split, and ended up with James Townsend. At the time, I knew nothing of James's background. So that was interesting to look back on and eventually get into powerlifting with him.
Yeah. Cool. Laura, do you have any follow-ups before I'm getting my rapid fire questions ready for you?
I'd want you to talk a little bit more about your fusion, because to me, that's just amazing that you're doing that.
Yeah, I'm super interested to hear more because I know the basics, but I don't really know the nitty gritty on it.
So scoliosis, everyone's got a curvature of the spine in some respect. Scoliosis is where that curvature is increasing over time. No one's really sure what causes it, but eventually the curve becomes quite extreme. In my case, it was roughly 45 degrees in the thoracic and 54 degrees in the lumbar, and nothing is going to stop that. Surgery was inevitable. Over time, if it's not treated, it will start to screw with the posture of the body, and ultimately it will lead to you possibly being killed if it gets bad enough, because it will eventually start hitting the organs. I didn't go that far. I had it when I was 14, and we've been trying to more or less adapt around it ever since then.
So I also have scoliosis, but it's very, very minor. So it's like I think most people have some degree of it a little bit.
I ended up with a severe scoliosis that just would not stop moving across both the X and the Z axis. So eventually we had to take 2 stainless steel rods. And they're essentially in there with screws and what are essentially medical grade cable ties and a hip graft. I think it took about 8 hours to do the surgery.
Do they know, like, is there any theories why? Like, why yours is so bad or not?
We don't know. We believe it's been with me since birth, so far as we can tell. But we don't actually know, like, what was the aggravating factor that led to it becoming so pronounced that surgery was the only option.
So you have this surgery, and then at what point do you go, oh, lifting weights?
To be completely honest with you, and this is something that I've butted heads with quite a few people on, it started out using the fusion as an excuse to do basically nothing. Like, if we do this, is it going to hurt the fusion? Is it going to break something? But that's not really sustainable. It's like, do you actually want to live your entire life avoiding any and all physical activity? And it eventually, with Crawford, Autry, and ultimately Townsend, it's just trying to figure out what the fusion was capable of. And it turns out to be a lot more than I had initially intended. Even though on paper, the idea of taking a fused spine and going, hey, let's add about 400 pounds. That's not rational, but it worked.
Being strong is always a good idea. Wow. That's amazing.
On paper, it seems like it'd be a bad idea. But it's worked beautifully over the last 6 years.
Yeah, the body's capable of a lot. And I think that's the thing. Like, more than we know. And, it's one of those things, like, I'm sure the medical people and, they probably had to give you the textbook answer, like, don't do any physical activity, don't do any of this, blah, 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 because I'm sure there's some sort of insurance issue that if they say the wrong thing and something does happen, blah, blah, blah. It drives me crazy because whatever they're telling people, so you're on the opposite end of what they're telling people. So somewhere in the middle, most people can probably land safely, right?
The exact words of my surgeon were, as long as you're coached well.
Okay, well I mean,
yeah.
Actually, I'll take that.
All right, it's more than I would have thought.
Yeah, that's more than I would have thought too.
I mean, at that point, we're 4, 5, 6 years in. I'm showing him video. It's like, this has already happened.
Yeah, right.
You can't stop this. No one's going to stop this. As long as we're not going completely crazy and trying to do it with just trash form, it works out well.
So my experience, I haven't had scoliosis that bad, but I had a pretty significant back injury in 2007, and I got an MRI and everything, and turns out there's a genetic deformity on one of my vertebrae, and it causes it to be less stable and slip out of place occasionally. And I had a doctor looked at that MRI and told me, I know you like to lift weights and everything, but you are structurally unable to lift anything over 315. So if you ever try, like, you're going to hurt yourself. And this is after having been competing for 10 plus years. I've already, squatted over 6, deadlifted over 6. So I looked at the guy, in the face, and I'm like, you don't know what you're talking about.
You don't know what I do.
Yeah. But that's the thing. That's the whole point. Like, he's literally saying it is physically impossible to do anything over that with this thing. And I'm like, I've already done it for 10 years. Like, you can't say it's physically impossible. And it makes me mad because they're telling these things to people and people believe it. Like, people believe they can't do things.
Yeah. I actually remember, I think it was a 2019 Georgia State meet. I was so ignorant of the history of the sport. I remember asking you if you had started lifting raw, and I believe you had said to me there was no raw when you initially started lifting.
At this point, that kind of dates yourself, how old you are.
Yeah, but I mean, to be completely fair, we are starting to see equipped come back in there. The Inzer Ergo Pros are essentially mid-range between knee sleeves and knee wraps, so we are seeing equipped come back.
The gateway drug.
Well, the gateway drug is be surrounded by enough equipped powerlifters that you want to try it yourself. For me, it was being curious, being backstage with the crew and wondering, like, for example, he's my fulcrum on equipped lifting, Dale McLaren, watching him deadlift and trying to figure out what he's going through with the suit. Why is it such a brawl to get, at the time I had no idea why it's such a brawl to get into position on the deadlift. Of course, now I know exactly why it's so difficult. Nothing but respect for McLaren.
Especially conventional deadlifting in a suit. Oh, that's awful.
I'm a sumo deadlifter.
I can't even imagine trying to conventional.
The way the fusion is set up, conventional puts stress on the wrong parts of my body. So sumo ends up being the only one I can do.
Yeah.
So we got to have a music component in here, right? So
yeah.
What type of music do you listen to when you train and or when you compete?
Off the top of my head, we've got Kill Switch, Five Finger, Alter Bridge, the aggressive sort of heavy metal hard rock.
Okay, so the stereotypical powerlifter music selection.
Pretty much, yeah. Fairly aggressive.
The opposite of Josh Rohr's music selection. You got it.
I mean, I'm not going down that road, but yeah.
It's pretty extreme.
We've had everything go through the Sonos DI. We've had Lamb of God. We've had, for a brief time, and I'm not kidding, Broadway musicals. I don't know how you lift that, but fair enough. We've had everything go through that speaker.
Okay. So this is broad strokes here. What, if any, changes, or we'll say changes, would you like to see in powerlifting?
One thing I actually greatly respected with USPA was the ability to have coaches handle handoffs, not anything else but the handoff. But that does two things. Number one, it gives whoever's lead spotter a bit of a breather, and I don't have to necessarily worry about cues. And number two, there's sort of an innate trust and familiarity, which makes at least the handoff a lot easier to deal with. And that's something I'd like to see other federations copy, frankly. The other thing I would put in, and we're starting to see this we actually had this problem at the Milnats, is minimum safety in bench. We've had a few lifters in virtually every meet that I've been at who set the bench safeties at 1.
That is rapidly climbing my pet peeve list, by the way.
And I'm starting to get really irritated with that because, yes, we do have spotters there. All right. But there are some things that we as spotters cannot do. Like if someone's hand goes straight over and they drop the bar, that's 200 pounds in free fall. There's no one who's going to stop that. So you may have spotters, but I'll take whatever I can get to keep a bar off of the lifter's chest, or more importantly, off of their throat. Here in Georgia, we've had refs who will set a minimum of 2, maybe, but primarily 3, because they'll see what's going on. They're just saying that's not on. It's going to be a minimum of 3. We're going to protect both the lifter and frankly, going back to what I said with the environment with the spotter, my nightmare scenario with that is a brand new spotter. We have the bench, and the person dumps it onto the chest, and the spotter is just terrified about whether or not it was their fault. I don't want my spotters in a position like that. So I will do what I can to prevent that from happening.
Agreed. And I'm going to rant for a second, so bear with me, but I cannot stand watching all these Instagram videos and people's training videos where they have the safeties like basically all the way down, lifting in the gym without a spotter, even sometimes with the spotter. Like, why the safeties are on the bench? Like, all you got to do is just put them in the right setting. Like, why the hell would you not do that? I can't get my mind around it. I don't understand it. People are like, well, just got to make sure you get it then. Well, yeah, no shit. I don't think anybody's purposely laying down on the bench thinking, okay, I'm going to miss this rep.
We're just going
to
throw it
on me.
Yeah, it makes me so mad. I feel like I'm becoming a more grumpy old man like every year, but I see these videos and I literally just get mad and like, I don't know. It just bothers me.
I'm looking at it. I'm just wondering. Yeah, I just don't understand the mindset behind that. Why would you not want something to keep that off of your chest? We're going to jump in this car, but we're not going to put the seatbelt on because we've got the steering wheel to keep us from flying through the windshield.
That is a very good, exactly. Well, I'm just not going to wreck. Well, okay, of course, right? That we're not going out intentionally planning to wreck. So
yeah, but Atlanta drivers.
Well, right, exactly.
Right. Yeah, God knows what's going to happen. As a new lifter, I remember a news story coming across on my phone saying that there was a lifter that was killed during a meet, or didn't die during the meet, but died shortly after when a bar dropped on their chest, hit them, and there was separation of organs, and they went to the hospital, nothing they could do, and that made an impression on me pretty early.
We deal with a significant amount of weight in this business, so I'm not sure why we wouldn't put the safeties up there.
And I think that's what people don't realize. Let's just make up a random person that can bench press 200 pounds. They might be able to do that for a set of 10 pretty easy, and it's easy weight, but 200 pounds is still a lot of weight and will do a lot of damage if it falls on you. And I think people just don't understand freak things can happen. Like, we're not inviting bad juju or whatever by setting safeties. We're just being smart and not being a jackass.
And my first thought also is when you get into equipped lifting, what can go wrong at raw lifting can go wrong or faster in equipped lifting.
Yeah, exactly.
So, way.
Yeah, we've seen a few of those. Yeah, that changed the dynamic entirely.
Yeah.
So I was going to ask you though, with your you said you had considered going into journalism at one point, yet you still write very detailed after action reports for every meet that you work. What got you started doing that? Because I think they're awesome, because you talk about a lot of the lifters, some of the lifters at least, but you talk a lot about the volunteers. And I think that's something that people get to kind of read the behind the scenes a little bit. I think that's pretty interesting.
One thing I've never really liked about any event, I used to work with small businesses and such up in Pittsburgh, is the idea of once an event's over, there's not much to talk about. There's a lot to talk about, but also in relation to powerlifting meets, it's actually something I've told people to do. Even if you don't, I have a reputation for getting a bit detailed. You don't have to go that far, but there is something to be said for actually looking at an event and going, what worked, what didn't, what really didn't, and how to improve going forward. You don't necessarily have to get as detailed as I did, but there is something to just essentially having a conversation with yourself and how to improve what you're doing, but in the case of the after actions, to also teach about how volunteering works, even though you could write a book and you'll never actually learn just how much goes into it until you actually do it. I'm looking to take the rep exam.
Yes. Oh
over
man,
the next few. I've had people, including our state chairs, saying, if you want to move to other parts of the sport, get in the seat.
that was my next question. That's not written out yet. So
I'm looking at that going, yeah, let's try that, and eventually end up breaking my voice in a different way.
I think that volunteering in general is like the best thing you can do as a lifter if you're trying to learn. And somebody like you that loves working the platform, if you become a referee and you still would rather work the platform, you still can. Like, it doesn't mean you no longer can do that. But I think that's what people think. Like, well, once I'm a referee, I no longer am going to be able to lift. I'm no longer going to be able to coach. Nothing. And it's not how it works. But when we have the same small pool of people, they're the ones that you got to ask every single time, because they're the only options. So what happens is you got the same people over and over, they get burnt out. If we had 25% of the lifters become a volunteer in some capacity, like, we could run multiple meets every single weekend and have plenty of people to cover it.
We'd have a ton of people covering it. We'd have more people. We'd have to accept that the new spotter loaders would be getting comfortable for the first few attempts. We'd have to expect that. But over time, that would pay a ton of dividends. We'd end up with very good spotter loader teams throughout the state, which would lead to better meets in general.
Yeah. And I think it's, important to say too, like, it's very rare that all of the spotters are new the first time. I mean, there's always, I say always, most every single time that I've seen, there's somebody like you, or, somebody that's done it before, you or Dale, like both of you guys have done it quite a bit.
Dale McLaren, the Apex example.
That are there to kind of teach on the fly. Like, and some of it you just have to learn on the go too. I mean, you can't learn everything, from a textbook or from a video, but you can learn a lot. But there's somebody there that's been there and done it that can help people through and, correct little errors or offer suggestions. And I think that's something to mention as well for people that are nervous maybe about volunteering. You're typically not like completely thrown to the wolves with nobody that knows what's going on.
Yeah, there is like one or two people I've called platform alongside Solna at the I believe it's the Trueborn Knockout. Very capable lifter, and I believe he has spotted and loaded several times at powerlifting meets. So you have those veterans on platform. It makes it a lot easier when you have more than one. That's probably what we're going to need to do more of, frankly, is have two people, and even if it means just highlighting them to point out to the new spotter loaders, you're not going to be thrown to the wolves. But we need to find some way to bring more people into spotting and loading and refereeing, but also to show them that, no, you're not going to be just left alone. We are going to help you get into this process.
So this is an open-ended, could go down a big rabbit hole, but what are your thoughts in general on the current state of powerlifting?
To be honest with you, I'm kind of torn. To be completely honest with you, I'm keen to see how USAPL and Powerlifting America evolve over the next 2 years, but I'm on record as saying I don't necessarily think the split, at least at present, has shown to really help anybody. We've got states that are all Powerlifting America and barely any USAPL, and then we have states that are all USAPL and barely any Powerlifting America. So we've ended up with a very strange patchwork of people across the country, and we'll have to see how they evolve over the next 2-3 years. I'm not really sure what to say on the split beyond that. It's going to be chaotic for the next few years as a sport.
See, I purposely didn't mention anything about the split. I let you go there on your own.
The way I've put it is that I will work in any federation that'll have me. I've got friends in all three federations. I've got no dog in that fight, frankly. I'm just curious to see how they will compete, how they will evolve alongside each other, and the different varieties we'll end up with in 3 or 4 years. That's all I've got on that one.
Do we want to move to the powerlifting situation and new lifter tip, Laura?
Sure. So the powerlifting situation, you're coaching a lifter that's going out for their second deadlift. The bar is being loaded for the lifter, and you realize they don't have any deadlift socks on. The referees didn't notice on the first attempt, and apparently you didn't either. What do you do?
If you have the time, correct it. See if you can, because there's a much better chance that they will notice in the second. You either lose the time before bars loaded, or you lose the time after bars loaded.
I honestly, I don't know the answer to this, because
I don't either.
part of me wants to say go out and do it and act like nothing's wrong, and then as soon as you're done, go put them on for your third. But you're exactly right. If the referees notice it, they're going to make you exit the platform, and then you're going to miss your second attempt on time. But I don't know if there's time, if they're getting ready to call bars loaded now, like you might save 5-10 seconds if you go right now before they say bars loaded. But is that still enough time? I don't know. I don't know the answer. I don't know that there is the right answer. I think I would be inclined to try it as is and just try to act as non-conspicuous as you can, and then hurry up and run off the platform and put them on before anybody notices. But I think you're right. There's a very good chance that the refs are going to notice, and then you're screwed. So I don't know that works. This is like an impossible situation, actually.
Yeah, it's do you lose 10-20 seconds before or after bars loaded? Because you're going to lose time regardless. When do you want to put that time on the altar and get rid of it?
So I've seen this exact thing happen, and it wasn't a second attempt. It was the opener, and the lifter was ready to go with no socks, and they didn't let him on the platform. And like, they ran to the back, started changing.
I actually think you were to my left when that happened. I think that was the Winter Classic. We had that at one point, and I remember leaning towards you and asking what the problem was. And it's like, I didn't notice at the time. So.
I had a lifter come out without any shoes on. I'm like, no, you have to wear shoes. Oh, well, I can't find my shoes in time. Yeah.
That person may be an EC member now.
Well, you got to give her a little grace. It was maybe her second meet, I think.
So Laura, what's your answer to that? Because I'm curious now.
I don't think I'd be able to send them onto the platform. I think I'd have to say, go get your socks on now. And if they don't make it, they don't make it.
Now that's throwing an integrity part into it that I didn't think about, because if as the coach I see it and I'm sending them out, then I'm purposely violating the rule, which I didn't think about that aspect of it. And it makes me feel like a terrible person now. So I would make them
you're throwing your lifter into a situation knowing that there's a really good chance that they're going to get screwed over and have to lose a considerable amount of time. It's a long time in our sport, but
yeah, my lifter didn't make it when she didn't have socks on. She missed her first attempt because she couldn't get her socks on time.
I don't think I've seen anything quite like that in a while. We did have one person at the, and I missed this. I was essentially TC at South Georgia, who had their knee sleeves down, not off, but down. And I did not know that was not something you could do for a squat.
Yeah, that can be a fairly quick fix though. You just pull them up because but it's one of, depending how tight they are, I guess it might not be real quick, but that's still probably faster than taking your shoes off, putting socks on, putting your shoes back on.
Yeah.
All right. So Jordan, what would be your new lifter tip?
It's counterintuitive, but I wouldn't focus too much on numbers. I would focus more on getting used to the rhythm of the lift, of the meet, getting used to the different pressures, the being in front of an audience, having people, let's be honest, having people you don't generally know judge your lifts, getting used to the rule book. What is depth? What is not depth? What is lockout? What is not lockout? And getting used to the different dynamics of a meet, frankly, rather than trying to put up massive numbers. Set your baseline, get used to how a meet is, and then build on that. You may not set the highest total for your first meet. I didn't, but you realize that there's a reason that we separate gym and meet PRs, because they're two wildly different things, and you don't really understand that until you actually get into it.
It's a great point.
Yep, agreed. I agree with everything you just said there. I was really hoping to argue against it, but I'm not sure I can.
I always joke with it this way. When we had the old weight class and I was just getting into equipped lifting, I was in the 93, and to my memory, I was in the 93 alongside Dale. So you've got someone who's brand new to equipped lifting versus the apex example of an equipped powerlifter. You're there for your first equipped meet just to set the baseline.
So Dale probably pulled for the win there.
Yeah.
Deadlift.
Dale is a mentor. I've keyed off of him on platform management, on equipped powerlifting. I have nothing but respect for the man.
Agreed. So speaking of respect for the man, that's actually why you're on this episode. I want you to know that you are somebody that I deeply respect and appreciate. I wish there were more people like you giving back as much as you do and really paying it forward. So I really do. I do appreciate you.
Thank you, sir.
Yeah, and I know you've volunteered at some of my meets back in the day, and I'm glad for this opportunity to get to know you a little bit better, because that's the thing when you're the meet director and you're just kind of going, and you're just grateful for people to be there.
I remember talking. I mean, I probably couldn't do meet direction. I've spoken with Kathy Mealy about just how putting together the state meet works between vendors and the venue and sponsors and getting the platform set up. That's a lot more than I'm ready to take on. So there's
a difference here. All right. Let me stop you right there, sir. So there's a difference between not being able to do it and choosing not to do it. Like you would be capable of doing it if you choose to do it. But
maybe don't start with a state meet.
But I also think that there's a lot of work that goes into being a meet director, and it's not always worth it for people. So I don't have any issue with you saying that you just don't want to do it, because it's a lot.
That's fair.
Don't sell yourself short.
That's fair.
Absolutely.
All right. I think that was all my questions. Jordan, you got anything else you want to add for the good of the cause, or?
Not offhand. We need people. We need to get more people involved.
Awesome. You on social media anywhere people can follow you?
Only the only one I publicly share is the Instagram, which is Jordan K189 on Facebook, not on Twitter. Just keep it to those Instagram and Facebook. So
awesome. Well, Jordan, like I said, we definitely appreciate you, and really am glad we got a chance to kind of talk a little bit more in detail about you. And hopefully people now can put a face with the name, with a personality a little bit.
Fair enough.
But definitely appreciate you being on, man. And I think that's going to do it for tonight. We'll catch you all later.
Bye now.
Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed today's episode of the Powerlifting and Power Ballads podcast, please remember to subscribe and share it with your friends.